Welcome to this deep dive, learners. Today we're going to be looking at John Green's The Fault in Our
Oh,
Stars.
classic.
Right. It's one that you shared with us, so thanks for that. And it's, technically fiction,
Hmm.
but the way it delves into what it means to be human and how we connect with each other and how we deal with, well, the big questions in life, it feels really, really real,
Absolutely. It's a story that stays with you.
For sure. So, our mission today is to unpack, kind of pull out some of the most thought-provoking, the most compelling parts of this story. What do you think? Ready to dive in?
Let's do it. We've got a great set of excerpts here. Moments in the lives of Hazel Grace Lancaster and Augustus Waters, these two teenagers facing life with cancer. And we also get to see a bit of their relationships with their families and friends, the people around them.
Yeah, and right off the bat, the book itself, with the copyright notice, it states it's fiction, and any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's like it's inviting us to think about the universality of what it's talking about, even though it's, well, a made-up story.
I think you're spot on. And one of the first things we see is Augustus, literally just having met Hazel, invites her over to watch V for Vendetta.
Right. Bold move, huh? And Hazel's reply, something about him possibly being an axe murderer, it's so witty.
And his comeback is perfect. Right away, you get a sense of their dynamic.
Absolutely. And then, bam, we learned something pretty crucial. Augustus has a prosthetic leg because of osteosarcoma.
Right. And that detail isn't just, physical. It informs his entire outlook on things.
Totally. And then there's this seemingly small thing, him pulling out a pack of cigarettes, unlit cigarettes.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting moment.
He explains to Hazel and her mom that it's a metaphor, holding the killing thing, but not giving it power.
They're a really striking image.
It is. And it tells us so much about how he thinks this need for control, even if it's just symbolic, when he has so little control over his illness.
I agree. It speaks volumes about his coping mechanisms, and I think it highlights how these young characters are forced to develop really sophisticated ways of dealing with their realities.
Then we see them at this memorial service for a young boy, Michael. And Augustus observes Isaac and Monica commenting on their PDA.
That scene is so layered, I think.
It really is. We learn that Isaac's about to lose his sight, and he has this incredibly intense relationship with Monica, all these always back and forths.
And Augustus's observations, kind of detached, a little bit funny even, set against Hazel's inner thoughts. It gives us this early look at how they both process difficult emotions and connect with others in their own unique ways.
Yeah, it's subtle, but so powerful.
Then Hazel shares her own story.
Her miracle, right? Diagnosed with stage 4 thyroid cancer at 13.
It's pretty heavy stuff. Her account is so direct, almost clinical, listing out the surgery, the radiation, and then this terrifying experience with her lungs filling up with water, bringing her to the brink in the ICU.
That part, her description, it's so raw. It really makes you feel the sheer physical and emotional toll of her illness. And not just on her whole family, too.
You can almost feel that struggle to breathe, she describes.
Right. And it's interesting how she delivers it so matter-of-factly.
Almost like she's detaching herself from it.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, what do you think that detachment says about how she's processed something so traumatic?
Maybe it's a way to cope, to face it head on
Yeah.
by presenting it as this series of events. It could be a way to control the narrative, to own her story in a situation where her body has, well, kind of betrayed her.
That makes a lot of sense. Then we get a glimpse into Augustus's home full of these, I don't know, kind of cheesy inspirational sayings his parents call encouragements.
Uh-huh, yeah, the live, laugh, love of cancer families. But it's interesting to see how that contrasts with Hazel's outlook, which is more grounded, less sentimental,
For sure. It gives us a peek into how his family copes, maybe by emphasizing positivity.
which is quite different from Hazel's, well, more realistic approach.
Then there's the dinner with Augustus's parents. They call him Gus, which immediately feels more intimate.
More personal.
Yeah, exactly. And what struck me about this whole scene is the normalcy of it all. They ask Hazel about being vegetarian, her wanting to minimize her, quote, the number of deaths she's responsible for.
And they ask about her being a college student, even the weather.
Totally. It's like they're deliberately avoiding anything related to her illness, her oxygen tank.
And for Hazel, that lack of focus on her being sick, it's clearly meaningful. She gets to be seen as more than just a patient.
Right. And then Augustus brings up V for Vendetta again, saying he sees Hazel as a filmic doppelganger to Natalie Portman.
It's a moment where he's seeing her, not just her illness.
Exactly. Then Augustus talks about his own experience with amputation, how his existentially fraught free throws in basketball happened to be on his last day with 2 legs, and there was this gap between the scheduling and the actual amputation.
That phrase, existentially fraught free throws, it's just so Augustus.
It really is. It captures that feeling of heaviness, even in everyday things, knowing what's coming.
And if we think about the bigger picture, it connects to what Isaac's going through with his impending blindness.
Yeah.
Both are in this in-between space waiting for a huge physical change.
So true. Then Hazel reflects on her growing feelings for Augustus, liking his voice, his tenured professorship in the Department of Slightly Crooked Smiles.
I love that description.
And she notices he has 2 names, Gus or Augustus, which gives her a choice, unlike her univalent Hazel.
That observation about the names is fascinating.
It is, right.
It speaks to Hazel's sense of self, maybe feeling defined or limited by her illness.
Just Hazel, yeah. Later, we find her at home reading The Price of Dawn, which is quite different from An Imperial Affliction, the book she truly connects with. And her mom's policy of not waking her up, it really emphasizes this idea of Hazel as a professional sick person.
That term, though, it's heavy but also kind of humorous.
Oh, totally. And her response to her mom's question about the book, did that boy give it to you? She says, by it, do you mean herpes?
Oh man, classic Hazel.
That dark humor is so her. It's a way to deflect, to maintain a sense of control.
I think you're right. Then she's at a bookstore at the food court buying sequels to The Price of Dawn.
And watching kids play, which reminds her of Augustus and his existentially fraught free throws.
It shows how Augustus is already becoming this presence in her thoughts, even in ordinary moments.
He's becoming part of her world. Then Hazel talks about an imperial affliction and the main character, Anna, who calls herself a side effect
Of the mutations that led to life's diversity.
Yeah, Hazel finds that description totally correct, which makes sense given her own experience with cancer.
It speaks to her feeling like a consequence of something larger, maybe not fully intended.
And the book's ending, with the Dutch tulip man and all that, it really fuels her desire for answers from the author Peter Van Houten.
It's not just about the plot for Hazel, is it? It's about finding meaning in something that's unfinished, which mirrors her own life.
Absolutely. Then there's this moment with Isaac, who's still heartbroken over Monica,
Understandably so.
and Augustus is trying to navigate that while playing a video game.
It shows the complexity of their friendship.
Yeah, and he says this line, "That's the thing about pain. It demands to be felt."
Those are powerful.
It really speaks to that core idea in the book about acknowledging suffering, not avoiding it.
Exactly.
Right.
Then a whole week goes by without Augustus contacting Hazel, which is unusual for them. And we see her anxiety wanting to keep being a person, worrying that her anxiety is just another side effect of dying.
That silence is so loaded, it shows how vulnerable she's becoming.
Her fear of losing that connection with Augustus is intertwined with this bigger fear of losing herself,
Absolutely. When Augustus finally calls, Hazel's having this very normal conversation with her parents about infrastructure in Guinea. Yeah, it emphasizes their attempts at normalcy. And then Hazel thinks about the distance to the swing set in her backyard, how tiring it is for her.
A reminder of her physical limitations.
Yeah, even simple things are hard.
Mm.
Then we get to Hazel's email to Peter Van Houten, all these deep questions about life and art.
She even compares what a story should be to an alarm, a call to arms, or a morphine drip.
That's so insightful. It shows her complex relationship with stories and her own mortality, and their next conversation when they talk about the email.
Oh yeah, Augustus calls it a bit pretentious.
And Hazel hits back with a quote from Max Mayhem, calling it sissy shit.
Classic. Their banter is so natural. It's what makes their connection work.
Totally. And then there's this big shift. Augustus asks, when was the last good kiss you had?
That's a loaded question.
Right. It takes their relationship to another level. Hazel's past kisses sound pretty awkward.
Kind of like kids playing, yeah.
And then Augustus says his was with his ex-girlfriend, Caroline Mathers, who's no longer suffering from personhood.
Wow. That's a pretty blunt way to put it.
It is. It brings up death and his past relationship in a way that's both unsettling and honest.
I think for Hazel, it's a mix of emotions, maybe some jealousy, some insecurity about this other girl.
But also that shared understanding of death. Right.
Exactly. It's a very Augustus way of putting it.
Hazel feels for him, but she can't imagine dating someone who's died. And Augustus replies, We're all just side effects, right?
It ties back to that side effect idea from an imperial affliction.
Exactly, a shared perspective.
And then he admits he thinks more about Monica, Isaac's ex, than his missing eye,
It speaks to his belief in love enduring even after loss.
even with everything they're facing.
Yeah. Then we have the meeting with Hazel's parents, which goes surprisingly well. They connect over basketball, Rick Smits.
It must be a relief for Hazel having her parents accept Augustus,
It is, right. It normalizes things for them.
especially with all the weight of their illnesses.
Then there's a car ride, lots of banter, and Augustus slams on the brakes.
That must have been scary for Hazel.
Oh, totally. It throws her physical fragility into sharp relief. Then he reveals his wish to take her to Amsterdam to meet Peter Van Houten.
What a gesture.
It is, but Hazel's mom is hesitant.
Virtual stranger, she says.
Yeah, and Hazel thinks about Augustus touching her face, her mixed feelings.
She's drawn to him, but there's a lot of vulnerability there, right?
Absolutely. She asked her friend Caitlin for advice about this boy problem, leaving out the Amsterdam part.
Keeping some things private.
Then Hazel gets fixated on Caroline Mathers and all the online tributes.
She's worried about being remembered only for having cancer.
It's a valid fear. She's trying to figure out her identity beyond her illness.
And reading Caroline's notes, most written by her parents, because her brain cancer changed her personality, it adds another layer.
It makes you think about who Caroline really was. Then Hazel's at the hospital for fluid drainage, and she asks her nurse about her boyfriend.
So she's definitely acknowledging her feelings for Augustus now.
She talks to her doctors about Amsterdam. Dr. Simons is against it, worried about risks.
But Dr. Maria argues for Hazel living her life.
It's that constant tension between extending life and the quality of life.
A tough balance.
Yeah.
Then there's that funny exchange about virginity.
With Venn diagrams.
Only Augustus would explain it like that. It shows their comfort level, though.
Totally. Hazel compares her BiPAP machine to a pet dragon breathing with her. She emails Van Houten, resigned to not going to Amsterdam, but desperate for answers about the book.
She wants closure. Like she wants closure for her own life.
Then she cries, overwhelmed by it all. Augustus calls and insists on coming over to see her old swing set of tears.
So sweet.
At first they say Amsterdam's off, but then her mom says Dr. Maria convinced them she needs to live her life.
What a turn of events.
Hazel's ecstatic. The morning of the flight, she's questioning breakfast foods.
Haha, why are some foods only for breakfast?
On the plane, Augustus takes out his unlit cigarette.
The flight attendant is not amused.
She even prohibits the metaphor. During the flight, they watch 300, super violent. Hazel's surprised by Augustus's reaction to it.
Maybe facing his own mortality makes him see things differently.
He wonders if everyone can be remembered, comparing Shakespeare to those who are forgotten.
It's that human fear of oblivion.
Totally. They land in Amsterdam. Hazel reads Howl to Augustus, who's rereading An Imperial Affliction.
It's their shared love of literature, connecting them.
The taxi driver speaks perfect English, describing Amsterdam's layout like tree rings.
The oldest parts in the center, so cool.
Hazel's amazed by the canals, the bicycles, the coffee shops.
Like an old painting, she says.
She reflects on living in a city built by the dead. The driver calls it a city of freedom, where sin can be found within that freedom.
Adds another dimension to the city.
At the Hotel Philosophe, rooms are named after philosophers. Hazel and her mom are in the Kierkegaard room, Augustus in the Heidegger.
Kidding, right.
At a fancy restaurant, Augustus quotes T.S. Eliot about stupid human voices always ruining everything.
He's connecting literature to his own frustrations with life's limitations.
They have champagne and Belgian white asparagus, new experiences for him.
Expanding his world.
Hazel wears a dress, but clarifies it's not a date dress. Augustus asks, "We're on a date."
The tension is building.
Over dessert, they talk about the afterlife. Hazel thinks forever is an incorrect concept.
He calls her an incorrect concept right back.
They talk about being removed from the rotation of life.
Facing their mortality head on.
Hazel confronts Augustus about his obsession with dying for something.
She finds it annoying, this idea that only certain lives matter,
She's advocating for the inherent value of all lives.
regardless of achievements or length.
By a canal, they talk about Caroline. Augustus says it's hard to romanticize dead people, that the stoic cancer victim trope isn't always true.
He's being realistic about illness, breaking down those idealized versions,
He admits he thought he saw her ghost but wasn't yearning for her.
accepting his present with Hazel.
They have deli meat for breakfast, not typical American fare. Hazel picks her outfit for meeting Van Houten, something like Anna from the book.
She's immersing herself in that world.
And she's so nervous.
understandably.
But the meeting is a huge letdown. Van Houten is rude, condescending.
He even insults Augustus.
It's awful. He dismisses his own book.
It's like he's crushing Hazel's hopes.
She tells him it's not acceptable to refuse to answer their questions.
She stands up for herself.
He reveals a few things, like the hamster dying peacefully.
But he avoids talking about the other characters getting condescending again.
Hazel shouts, "You promised!"
So much frustration.
Leadwidge, his assistant, apologizes, saying he's a monster.
Even she recognizes how badly he's behaving.
They go to the Anne Frank house. Augustus says Otto Frank didn't survive a war, but a genocide.
Highlighting the specific horror of the Holocaust.
Hazel's deeply affected by the exhibit, especially the book listing the victims.
She wants to remember them.
They talk about the tragedy of Anne dying so close to liberation.
It's a heavy experience for them both.
Back at the hotel, they go to Augustus's room. Hazel kisses him and tells him she loves him.
A big step for them.
They're intimate. The next day, they tell Hazel's mom about the Anne Frank house, skipping the kissing part.
Keeping some things private.
Hazel jokes about Augustus's Venn diagram humor. Her mom gives them space.
She's supportive.
Hazel reflects on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, saying sick people aren't stuck on the lower levels.
She says those urges are transfigured by illness.
It's a powerful critique. They get champagne on a plane thanks to cancer perks.
A little bit of joy.
At dinner with Hazel's parents, they discuss the book. Her dad finds it hopeless.
Hazel says it's honest.
Different perspectives on how to approach tough stuff.
For sure.
The next day, Augustus wants to write a sequel to the book for Hazel. He talks about his analysis of the characters, telling her to be patient.
Showing his love for her.
He also talks about wanting to write a memoir to be remembered.
That desire for legacy again.
While playing video games with Isaac, Augustus has a coughing fit, can't breathe.
Things take a turn.
He's rushed to the hospital. In the ambulance, Hazel recites The Red Wheelbarrow.
All she can think of.
It's beautiful, that connection to poetry in a crisis. Augustus wakes up weak and cold.
It's heartbreaking.
He makes a joke about his looks in Hazel's oxygen tank.
Even now, he finds humor.
His dad hugs Hazel, thanking God for her. It's their last good day.
So sad.
Hazel argues with her parents about spending time with Augustus.
She wants independence.
She dreams about Augustus in a wheelchair, Isaac giving a eulogy before he's even died.
Her subconscious fears coming through.
A nurse comments on her resilience, saying she rated her pain a 9 out of 10.
Hazel was saving her 10.
She reads messages after Augustus dies, finding some self-serving.
She sees through the platitudes,
She imagines Augustus's take on heaven and basketball.
keeping him alive in her thoughts.
At the wake, she whispers to him, "I love you, present tense."
So intimate.
At the funeral, Isaac's eulogy is funny and heartfelt.
Capturing Augustus perfectly.
Hazel gives her own eulogy, quoting a cheesy encouragement.
And acknowledging that funerals are for the living.
She struggles with the idea of heaven, but accepts his belief in something.
Trying to reconcile their different views.
At the graveside, she feels small, wanting to be a child again.
It's the finality of it all.
Back home, her dad cries with her, calling it total bullshit.
Raw grief.
Hazel searches for anything Augustus wrote.
Wanting to hold on to him.
Van Houten reveals he lost a daughter to leukemia. He says grief doesn't change you, it reveals you.
A different perspective on grief.
Hazel goes to Augustus's house, finds nothing written for her.
More unfinished stories.
She worries about her parents' lives after she dies.
A profound concern.
She asks Augustus's mom about his writing, mentioning missing pages.
Maybe for Hazel, maybe not.
Then she remembers Lidwide's email with 4 attachments.
The missing pages.
Augustus's letter to Van Houten asking him to write a eulogy for Hazel.
His last act of love for her.
He says he's afraid of being forgotten, wants to leave a mark.
A universal human desire.
He describes seeing Hazel in the ICU, knowing he was dying.
So poignant.
He wanted more time with her, to fall in love. He ends with, "I left my scar."
What a powerful ending.
Even in this fictional world, we find so much truth about love, loss, and searching for meaning. What stands out to you most?
Their ability to find humor in darkness, their yearning for connection, is also human. Augustus wanting to be remembered, Hazel finding meaning in the everyday, they're different approaches to facing mortality.
It's all so powerful. Thank you for sharing this book. It's been an honor to explore it with you. And here's something to consider. How do these fictional stories about love and loss help us understand our own lives and our own mortality?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is. Until next time, learners, keep exploring.
Keep diving deep.